They showed up with chainsaws, not a knock, not a call, just a guy in a neon vest pointing at my backyard like it was a condemned building. One of them actually smiled at me and said, "HOA says this thing's gotta go." Alright, let me take you back. We bought the house a couple years ago after a full decade of saving and scraping in a 2-bedroom rental with paper-thin walls and neighbors who thought 2 a.m. was the perfect time to start drum practice. We weren't poor, just stuck. Every time we were close to getting ahead, something would hit. Car repairs, medical bills, layoffs, you know how it is. But then things finally clicked. I landed a better job in IT, Sarah got tenure at the school, and for once it felt like the ground wasn't shifting under our feet. We started house hunting with this stupid little list Sarah wrote on the back of a grocery receipt. Trees, sunlight, friendly neighbors, room for a garden. I added one thing, space for a grill and a gazebo. I always pictured myself out there with a cold beer and some ribs sizzling. Maybe the dog chasing squirrels, maybe the kid playing ball. You know, that kind of thing. When we finally found the place, it wasn't perfect, but it felt right. It was this quiet little cul-de-sac on the edge of a neighborhood that looked like something out of a Home Depot commercial. Trimmed hedges, waving flags, neighbors who actually waved back. The HOA fees were a little steep, but Sarah was into the idea of order. "At least we won't end up next to a meth lab," she said, half joking. We signed the papers, popped a bottle of cheap champagne in our tiny new backyard, and promised we'd never take it for granted. That backyard? Man, it's not big. Just a patch of grass, a skinny cedar tree that leans like it's drunk, and a wooden fence that definitely saw better days. But to me, it felt massive. Wide open sky. Finally, no upstairs neighbors stomping around like Bigfoot. I remember sitting out there our first weekend, just watching the clouds and listening to nothing but wind chimes 2 houses down. I swear I almost cried. We moved in during the fall, so I didn't get around to any real backyard stuff until it warmed up again. But I knew what I wanted. A gazebo. Not a big gaudy thing. Just something cozy and shady where I could work outside. Sarah could read her books, and we could maybe have friends over without cooking ourselves in the Texas sun. I looked up the HOA's rules before even thinking about it. And let me tell you, I combed through that thing like it was a CIA dossier. Dozens of pages of tiny text, weirdly obsessed with mailbox heights and approved mulch colors. But guess what? Not a single word that said you couldn't build a damn gazebo in your backyard. The only mention was this vague section about structures that may require approval if visible from public areas. Mine wouldn't be. Our yard's fenced and it's lower than the street level, so unless someone's parachuting in, no one's gonna see it. I even emailed the HOA just to be extra safe. No answer, not even a "we'll get back to you." Just silence. That should have been my first red flag, but hindsight's 20/20, right? Anyway, about the gazebo. My buddy Bill owns a small construction company that builds custom decks, pergolas, gazebos, all that stuff. We went to high school together, and he's the kind of guy who still calls me chief and insists on paying for every third beer like it's a sacred law. I told him what I wanted, he came out, looked at the yard, nodded a lot, and said, "Yeah, easy, I'll cut you a deal." And he did. Gave me this crazy discount, like real friends and family pricing. Sarah was all for it. Cody, our son, thought it looked like something out of Minecraft and immediately claimed it as his future hangout zone. Even the dog loved it. He'd stretch out on the wooden floor and chase sunbeams while I worked on my laptop. I strung up some fairy lights, added a little fan, even dragged out an old speaker for music. It became this little sanctuary. I was proud of it, man. Like I'd built it with my own 2 hands, even though all I really did was hold a tape measure and pass Bill a few beers. The neighbors seemed cool with it too, at least at first. Old Man Joe from 2 doors down gave me a thumbs up the first time he saw it. His wife Linda brought over some lemonade and asked if we were planning to host any BBQs soon. A couple families walked by and said, "That's real nice, Mike." I figured I'd hit the jackpot. A peaceful home, a happy wife, a shaded backyard oasis. Hell, I was even keeping up with lawn care. Life was good. And then the letters started coming. The envelope looked harmless. You know those little white HOA letters they slide into your mailbox like it's no big deal? No tracking, no warning, just sitting there like a grocery flyer. I remember picking it up with one hand, leash in the other, 'cause I was walking Charlie and thinking, probably another reminder about recycling bins or dog poop. Spoiler, it wasn't. I opened it right there on the sidewalk and immediately felt that weird gut sink. You ever get that? Like when your credit card gets declined and you know there's money in the account. It was this polite but not really note that said, "Dear Mr. Rivera, our recent community walkthrough has identified a structure in your backyard that may be in violation of the neighborhood's architectural guidelines. Please contact us to discuss next steps." No hello, no hope you're doing well, just straight to the point, like I'd built a moonshine shack back there. I remember standing there, staring at it, blinking like maybe I misread it. Charlie was already halfway done with his business, and I was frozen on the sidewalk, HOA letter flapping in the breeze like a red flag. When I showed Sarah, she frowned but didn't look surprised. Just call them, she said. Maybe they just want to make sure it's safe or something. Safe? I said. It's a gazebo, not an underground bunker. Still, I wasn't going to ignore it. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, straight to voicemail. Not even one of those "thanks for calling the Fairview Glen HOA, your call is important to us" recordings. Just a robotic beep. So I left a message, polite, calm, friendly even, said my name, my lot number, offered to provide pictures and copies of the plans if they wanted them. That was me trying to play ball, keep it civil, be a good neighbor. No one called back. A few days passed, then a week. No response. Sarah said maybe it was a form letter, some kind of blanket thing they sent to everyone. That kind of made sense, until I bumped into Karen. Now, I didn't know who she was at the time. I'd seen her around. Sharp haircut, crisp khakis, always walking with that stiff, I'm on a mission posture like she was a mall cop or something. We crossed paths near the community mailbox, and I just said, "Hey there," thinking maybe she was new to the neighborhood. She gave me this look, not unfriendly, but tight, controlled. "You're the one with the structure in the back, right?" she asked, just like that, no introduction. I blinked. You mean the gazebo?" Her smile tightened. "Well, we don't typically allow those without going through the proper process." I laughed, not trying to be rude, just confused. "Oh, I looked through the guidelines. Didn't see anything saying they weren't allowed." "There's an approval process," she said, still smiling. "You should have submitted a request before installation." "But it's in the backyard," I said. "It's not visible from the street, and I emailed the HOA before starting. Didn't get a response." She nodded once, real slow. "Well, we're looking into it." And then she walked off. Not another word, just a calm, smooth pivot and click-clack of sandals fading into the parking lot, and I just stood there, holding my mail like a chump. When I got home, I opened the HOA guidelines again. Went through every page with a highlighter like it was my job. And I wasn't crazy. There was nothing in there banning gazebos on private, fenced-in backyards. Nothing that said I had to use one of their contractors. Nothing about retroactive permission. I wasn't breaking any rules, I was just breaking their rhythm. I hadn't asked for permission, and something about that seemed to tick them off more than the gazebo itself. Still, I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was just a miscommunication. Maybe Karen was new to the board and hadn't read the bylaws herself. I even left a second voicemail. Friendly again, offered to fill out whatever paperwork they wanted. Nothing. And then the second letter came. The second letter came in a bright yellow envelope. Real cheerful, like it was supposed to come with balloons and cake or something. I knew that color meant trouble. It practically screamed, "We're serious now." I opened it sitting at the kitchen table, still sweaty from mowing the lawn. Charlie was panting next to me, tail thumping against the floor like everything was just peachy. But the letter, it wasn't a warning this time. It was a fine. $250. Unauthorized structure installed without prior written approval from the HOA Architectural Committee. No signature, no contact name, just a boilerplate citation and a due date. I read it twice, then a third time, thinking maybe I'd missed the part where they asked nicely first. But nope, just straight to the fine. Sarah came in while I was staring at it and asked what was wrong. I handed it to her. She read it in silence, pressed her lips together like she was trying not to curse in front of the dog, then set it down and said, "So, what happens if we don't pay?" Good question. I didn't have an answer. I'd never dealt with HOA stuff like this before. I always thought of them as the folks who reminded you to trim your bushes or sent out newsletters about garage sale weekends. Not the kind of people who dropped legal-sounding fines in your mailbox like they were traffic cops. I went back to the rules again. This time, I highlighted everything, even remotely related to structures, yard modifications, approvals, visibility. Still nothing that matched their language. Nothing about prior written approval being mandatory for structures in the backyard that aren't visible from the street. In fact, it almost read like it was intentionally vague, just enough wiggle room to use it however they wanted. I sent an email, calm, clear, with attached photos, screenshots from the HOA guidelines, and even a time-stamped copy of my original email I sent before construction. I asked them to please explain how I was in violation. I asked for a meeting, I asked for a call, I even offered to pay a fee if it turned out I'd misunderstood something. Just talk to me like a human. No answer. A week later, another letter. $500 this time, plus a warning that additional penalties may apply, including potential legal action if the unauthorized structure was not removed within 30 days. That's when I started to feel the walls closing in. I talked to Bill, the guy who built the gazebo. I told him what was going on. He swore up and down he'd built the same kind of structure in other neighborhoods without issues. "Sounds like someone's got a stick up their ass," he muttered, then offered to come out and meet with the HOA if they wanted clarification. "Happy to show him the plans," he said. "Everything's by code. I've built tougher gazebos for state parks." But no one from the HOA ever returned our calls. That's when the other stuff started. Subtle things at first. We got a notice about our garbage bins. Apparently, one of them had been left visible from the street for more than 30 minutes after pickup. A violation. Then one about the grass, supposedly over 3 inches tall. Sarah and I measured it together in the backyard like a couple of lunatics. 2.5 max, still got a warning. Then came the dog complaint. Ongoing barking nuisance during daytime hours. Charlie, the dog who literally naps 20 hours a day and barks maybe twice a week when the UPS guy dares step foot near the driveway? We laughed about that one until we realized it was another official citation, and each one was being logged against our resident record. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every week something new, and every single one came with either a fine or a warning that another infraction could lead to legal escalation or liens on the property. That's when I realized it wasn't about the gazebo anymore. This wasn't about aesthetics or compliance. This was personal. I started noticing Karen more. Always out walking the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on like she was patrolling a military base. She'd glance over when she passed our house, but never waved. Once, I caught her standing across the street, just staring at our backyard through a gap in the fence. Not taking photos, not writing anything down, just watching. It was creepy as hell. I tried talking to a few neighbors about it. Joe from 2 doors down just shook his head and muttered, "You're not the first. Won't be the last?" Then he changed the subject to football. Another neighbor, Liz, was super sympathetic but clearly didn't want to get involved. "I've got enough going on," she said. "I can't afford to piss off the board." Sarah stayed calm, at least outwardly. She started doing more yoga in the living room and stress-baking muffins, which wasn't helping my waistline but definitely helped my mood. Cody, on the other hand, started getting anxious. He caught me one evening rereading one of the HOA letters and asked if we were going to lose the house. That hit like a punch to the chest. I told him no, of course not. But the truth? I didn't know. Then came the kicker. One afternoon, I got a knock on the door. Not the mailman, not a neighbor. 2 guys in work boots and safety vests, standing there with clipboards and this ridiculous amount of swagger for a couple of dudes holding hedge trimmers. One of them smiled and said, "We're with Clearview Maintenance, here for the structure removal." I blinked. "Structure removal?" He nodded. "Backyard gazebo. Got the order right here." He held up a laminated piece of paper with the HOA logo, a couple of signatures, and the words, "Approved for removal due to noncompliance." I laughed, like actual laughed. "You're joking." "No, sir," he said. "We're authorized to begin demolition today." I didn't let them pass the front steps. I told them they weren't touching anything without a court order. They didn't argue, just shrugged and said they'd report back. But they took photos of the yard before leaving. That was the moment I knew things were spiraling. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. And for whatever reason, they had picked me to make an example out of. By that point, my mornings all started the same way, checking the mailbox with this low-key dread in my chest, like maybe this would be the day they finally gave up. Maybe I'd open it and it would be a normal week. Grocery coupons, water bill, junk from realtors, something boring, something safe. Nope. That day, it was a final notice, a bright red stamp on the envelope that made it feel like some kind of government eviction notice. Inside, it was just more of the same. Pay the outstanding fines, remove the gazebo immediately, or face legal escalation, including but not limited to liens, forced removal, and property access by authorized agents. The way they worded it made it sound like I was harboring a meth lab instead of enjoying afternoon iced tea under some fairy lights. I felt this weird calm settle over me. Not peace? Not really. More like the kind of numb focus you get when you realize you're not crazy and someone really is trying to screw you over. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started digging. If they wanted to play this by the book, then I'd show up with a damn library. I went through the HOA's CC&Rs again, page by page, clause by clause, printing sections and highlighting them like I was prepping for a courtroom drama. I wrote a formal letter, an actual printed letter, where I explained my case clearly and calmly. I attached every piece of evidence I had, Time-stamped photos of the gazebo, emails I'd sent asking for approval, screenshots of the unread messages. I even added neighbor testimonials from Liz and Joe, who'd both agreed to write quick statements saying the gazebo didn't bother them one bit. Then I mailed it. Certified, return receipt requested, and waited. Nothing. I followed up with a phone call, left another message, still nothing. Then I took it up a notch. I emailed the city. Not the HOA, the actual city code enforcement office. I explained what was happening and asked if the HOA had the legal right to forcibly remove private property that wasn't in violation of any city ordinance. The woman who got back to me, bless her, said something that still rings in my ears. Technically no, but we don't regulate HOAs. You'll probably need a lawyer. I asked her if I was missing something obvious. She said, no. This is how they do it. They wear you down. That night, I sat in the backyard under the gazebo with a beer in my hand and my dog asleep at my feet and just stared at the fence. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the damn gazebo. It was about how these people could just twist the screws whenever they felt like it, and there was no referee, no grown-up in the room to blow the whistle. I called a few local attorneys. The first one told me straight up he didn't handle HOA cases, not worth the trouble unless you're suing for big damages. The second one said sure, he'd look into it. For a $5,000 retainer, just to look. The third was some firm that advertised on the radio, and they told me it was unlikely I'd prevail, and I should consider compromise. Compromise? They wanted to chainsaw my gazebo. I tried the local Better Business Bureau. Nothing. The state attorney general's office, they said I could file a complaint online, but it would take time to be reviewed. I filled it out anyway. At that point, throwing darts at the wall felt like progress. Sarah suggested we try talking to the HOA board directly, maybe bring everything to the next community meeting. I was skeptical, but she was right. We hadn't actually gone to one of those yet. I figured it couldn't hurt. So we went. It was held in the community clubhouse, one of those beige, soul-sucking little rooms with folding chairs and lukewarm lemonade. Karen was there, of course, standing behind a podium like she was addressing the UN. She smiled when we walked in, the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. They went through boring agenda stuff first. Landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, the usual HOA mumbo-jumbo. Then they opened the floor for community concerns. I stood up, calm, respectful, no raised voice, no finger pointing. I explained everything. The lack of response to my emails, the unclear language in the CC&Rs, the escalating fines, the attempted removal without notice. I even passed out copies of the relevant pages from the bylaws with sections highlighted, like a polite PowerPoint, just without the slides. Karen didn't even flinch. She waited until I finished, then gave this little sigh, like she was bored, and said, "Mr. Rivera, we appreciate your passion, but unfortunately, as per Section 9B of the Design Standards Addendum, which was ratified 2 years ago, any freestanding structure over 6 feet in height requires prior architectural approval, regardless of location on the lot." Now I had read the design standards multiple times. That clause wasn't in there. I said as much gently. She said they had updated the addendum and that it may not be reflected in the online copy yet. And that was it. Meeting adjourned. No vote, no discussion. Just Karen clicking her pen and moving on to the next topic like I hadn't just poured my guts out in front of a room full of neighbors. We walked out into the parking lot in silence. Sarah squeezed my hand. Cody, who we'd dragged along so he could see how grown-ups settled disputes, just looked at me and said, "They're full of it." Yeah, kid, you're not wrong. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one more card to play, the people. I went online, Facebook, Nextdoor, local forums. I wrote out the whole story, calmly, factually, with evidence. I didn't rant, I didn't whine, I just laid it out like I was asking for advice. And it took off. Fast. People started messaging me with their own HOA horror stories. A guy in the next neighborhood over said he got fined for having a bird feeder. A woman across town got threats for painting her door too bright. It was sage green. A retired vet said his American flag was too large and violated aesthetic balance. It was like opening a floodgate. I wasn't alone anymore, but at the time I still felt like I was losing. The fines were stacking up. The legal threats were getting louder. I was starting to lose sleep. Sarah was worried. Cody was asking questions I didn't know how to answer. And for the first time, I seriously thought about caving, about tearing down the gazebo just to get my life back. But then something happened. Something I never saw coming. And it changed everything. It happened in the most ordinary way. No dramatic music, no slow-motion moment, just me sitting at the dining room table, drinking microwaved coffee and trying to sort through a mess of papers that all looked the same. Fines, threats, reminders. Cody came in, phone in hand, and said, "Hey Dad, you want to hear something weird?" I looked up, completely fried from lack of sleep and HOA-induced rage. If it's about that raccoon in the trash again, I swear to God. He grinned. Not that. I recorded something. Now, to be clear, Cody isn't the kind of kid who randomly records stuff. He's not glued to TikTok or trying to go viral, but he'd been acting weird lately, curious, observant. I thought he was just picking up on our stress, but turns out he was paying way more attention than I gave him credit for. "I was out walking, Charlie," he said, "and I passed by the clubhouse. The door was cracked. I heard voices, and, I don't know, something just told me to hit record." He handed me his phone. I hit play. At first, it was just background noise, footsteps, the kind of murmur you hear when people think they're alone. Then I heard it, clear as day, Karen's voice. "Look, if we let one guy build with his own contractor, they're all going to want to. We lose control. You want that?" Another voice, a man, older. But he says it was within code, backyard, invisible. He's got a point. Then Karen again, sharper this time. He undercut the deal. That builder didn't go through us, didn't pay the access fee, didn't contribute to maintenance. You know how this works. We give him a pass, we lose the stream. I've kept this HOA financially stable for 5 years because we funnel projects to our vendors. They kick back, we maintain the budget, everyone wins. Now, are you with me or not? Silence. Then the man mumbled something like, yeah, I'm with you. Then Karen again, this time colder. Good, because if he doesn't back down, we push until he does. We've removed bigger things than a gazebo. I paused the recording. Just sat there, holding the phone, the edges of my fingers tingling. I think I laughed first. That weird, stunned laugh you let out when your brain's not sure whether to cry or start flipping tables. Sarah came in and saw my face. "What is it?" she asked, and I handed her the phone. She listened to it all the way through, her mouth tight, her eyes narrowing more and more by the second. "That's it," she said. "That's the whole damn thing." Cody looked a little freaked out. I wasn't trying to spy or anything. I knew something was off. "Buddy," I said, "you might have just saved your dad's sanity." Because here's the thing. Up until that moment, it had all felt like this slow-motion nightmare, like I was drowning in red tape and rules written in invisible ink. But now I had proof. Not just of their vendetta, but of the why. This wasn't about aesthetics or rules or neighborhood harmony. It was a racket, a freaking shakedown wrapped in khakis and polite memos. That audio, that was my golden ticket. It was the moment the chessboard flipped. The second, the underdog got a slingshot to aim at Goliath's head. But even then, I didn't totally understand how deep it went. Not yet. That came later after I looped in the one person who'd been oddly quiet since all this started. Mr. Fletcher. Now, Fletcher used to be on the HOA board, retired accountant, kind of gruff, always wore these faded Vietnam vet ball caps and talked like every sentence was being filed in a cabinet somewhere in his head. He'd stepped down a year or two ago, and people whispered it was because of disagreements. I figured now was the time to find out what that meant. So I knocked on his door. No plan, no speech, just the phone in my pocket and that recording ready to go. He answered like he always did, one eyebrow up, eyes narrowed like he was scanning for nonsense. I told him I needed 5 minutes. He gave me 10. When I hit play, he didn't blink, didn't say a word until the very end. Then he let out this low, gravelly whistle and said, "Well, she finally said it out loud." Turns out, Fletcher knew all about it. The kickbacks, the vendor deals, the hush-hush fees labeled as community improvements that never quite showed up on the books. He'd started asking questions during his last year on the board, got stonewalled, eventually got pressured out. They told him he was disruptive, but he kept records. Boy, did he keep records. Ledgers, meeting notes, emails, all of it. He handed me a dusty file folder with the kind of reverence you give to an old family Bible. "She's smart," he said, "but not perfect. And this might be enough." I thanked him, not really sure what I was holding, just knowing that whatever it was, it felt heavy in the right way. That night, I sat in the gazebo, files spread out across the table, dog at my feet, and this weird new feeling creeping in. Hope. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't trying to survive their game. I was getting ready to play my own. I didn't sleep much that night, not from stress, though. That was new. This time, it was the good kind of restless, the wired, buzzing kind that comes when the tide starts to shift and you feel it in your bones before it shows up in the real world. I just sat there in the gazebo, all the documents from Fletcher stacked next to me, Cody's recording looped a dozen times in my headphones, and the cool breeze reminding me that this stupid wooden structure was worth fighting for. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to melt paint and started sorting. Fletcher's folder wasn't a folder, not really, it was a bomb. Neatly labeled, date-stamped, color-coded proof that Karen had been turning our neighborhood into her own little cash register for years. There were financial reports with numbers that didn't add up, contractor payments that never got approved publicly, and these consulting fees that all just happened to end up back at the same mailing address, one that matched Karen's little real estate LLC she conveniently never mentioned. I found a handwritten note from one of the former vendors, dated about a year ago, where he flat out said Karen required a 15% kickback on all HOA jobs. She called it the cost of access, he'd written, like it was just a line item on an invoice. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I could, but reading it in black and white made me feel like I was holding someone's dirty laundry right before a dinner party. You don't want to believe your neighbor, the one who waves to kids and plants begonias, is running a mini corruption scheme under your nose. But here we were. I spent the next few days pulling everything together. I didn't want to jump the gun or run to Facebook screaming gotcha with no plan. That's what they expected. That's how they'd spin it. Me being emotional, me being reckless. So I decided I'd beat them at their own game. Quietly. Methodically. I started with the paper trail. First, I got a scanned, high-res copy of the recording. Fletcher's nephew, apparently some kind of sound engineer, cleaned up the audio so even the little pauses and sighs came through clear. Then I paired it with the financial docs, the ones that showed inflated contractor rates and matching payouts to Karen's side business. But I didn't just throw them together in a pile. I built a timeline. Email from me asking about approval. Silence. Construction complete. First violation notice. Fine, more fines. Recording timestamp. Contractor payments dated days later. Memos signed by Karen retroactively updating bylaws. Withdrawal of funds under beautification projects. It all lined up. It sang. I talked to Maddie, this local paralegal I knew through Sarah's school. Her kid and Cody used to be in the same robotics club. I bought her a coffee and asked her to look everything over. She wasn't a full-fledged lawyer, but she knew enough to confirm I wasn't crazy. This is bad, she said. Like she could go to jail, bad. Still, I wanted a bigger push, something official, something real. So I wrote to the state attorney general's office again. But this time, I didn't just file a complaint. I sent a full packet. The timeline, the audio, the financials, the scanned pages from the HOA handbook and bylaws with discrepancies highlighted, the vendor letter, even a sworn affidavit from Fletcher stating he'd witnessed Karen altering vote records during board meetings. I kept everything neat, clear, and calm. Then I did something I hadn't done yet. I started knocking on doors, not all of them, just the ones that mattered. Liz and Joe, a couple folks I'd seen at the meeting, some of the newer families who looked like they wanted to say something during meetings but kept their heads down. I told them what I had, not everything, but enough to show I wasn't just some guy obsessed with a backyard gazebo. I showed them proof that Karen wasn't just bossy, she was cashing in on their backs. And that's when something shifted. Joe, who always looked like he was 5 minutes from yelling at a cloud, stepped out onto his porch and muttered, "Told you something smelled off." Liz invited me in and said, she tried to find me once for wind chimes. Wind chimes, Mike. I knew it wasn't about noise. One by one, people started opening up. I kept a list of those willing to sign letters. Then I did something bold. I started organizing a petition to call a special HOA meeting. That's allowed in the rules, by the way. Little clause tucked in the back of the bylaws. If enough members request it, the board has to schedule a community-wide meeting within 30 days. Most people don't know about it, or they're too tired to try. But I wasn't tired anymore. I had a dozen signatures within the first week, then 20, then 30. Karen started noticing. I got a letter, this time not from the HOA, but from her lawyer, accusing me of defamation and malicious interference with governance. I laughed out loud when I read that. Malicious interference? I was practically running a civic education program at this point. I called Fletcher, told him what I was doing. He offered to speak at the meeting, said he still had his HOA board member badge somewhere in a drawer. I said, let's make it a night to remember. Because here's the thing, they were used to people folding, paying the fines, tearing down the shed, shrinking into their houses and mumbling, it's not worth it. But this time it was worth it. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone they'd steamrolled who didn't have a recording or a Fletcher or a kid smart enough to hit record when the door was cracked open. I wasn't just going to keep the gazebo. I was going to burn the whole rotten system down. By the book, and loud enough for the whole damn neighborhood to hear. You ever feel that shift in energy when the momentum finally flips in your direction? Like, not all at once, but just enough that you start walking a little taller, breathing a little easier, even if the fight's not over yet. That's what it felt like. The petition worked. We hit the required percentage of homeowners, just over 30%, to force a special HOA meeting. Karen tried to stall, of course. Sent out a memo saying there was a review period for signature validation, whatever that meant. Then she called it an unauthorized gathering and warned of consequences for those inciting division. Yeah. She actually used the word inciting, like we were organizing a riot instead of, trying to talk about corruption in a folding chair circle. Didn't matter. I'd read the bylaws more times than I care to admit, and we were in the clear. The board had two options: schedule the meeting or admit they were in violation of their own rules. We got the meeting, and that's when the gloves came off. First, they started targeting the neighbors on my side. Liz got a fine for improper window treatments. Joe was cited for unauthorized porch furniture. Someone reported a young couple down the street for excessive vehicle noise, which was wild because they drove a Prius. It was so blatant it was almost funny. I sent out an email to the petition signers, "The heat is coming, hold the line." We held. Then they went after me again, this time trying to bury me in paperwork. I got a packet in the mail 3 inches thick, full of procedural notices and violation summaries and photocopied pictures of my backyard from weird angles, like they were trying to prove I was operating a secret pool hall back there. They included an updated violation fee schedule. Apparently, my unpaid fines had ballooned to over $6,000, and they were evaluating property lien proceedings. Sarah read that letter and said very calmly, "So when do we fire back?" That was my cue. I dropped the first hammer with the state attorney general's office. I'd been in touch with an investigator there, a quiet, serious guy named Russell who spoke in clipped, careful sentences and asked a lot of questions. I sent him the final batch of documents, the cleaned-up audio recording, and the HOA's attempt to block the special meeting. He responded with a single line, "Thank you. This is very helpful." I had no idea what that meant. Then I looped in a local news contact. Remember the guy I mentioned from Facebook who messaged me after I posted my story? He worked for one of those independent investigative blogs, the kind that runs deep dives on local corruption and makes city council members sweat. He ran with it. The article dropped 2 days before the meeting. Headline: Gazebo Gate: How one HOA turned a backyard structure into a power grab. It blew up. We're talking shares, comments, local Facebook groups eating it up like popcorn. There were screenshots of Karen's LLC records, maps showing overlapping vendor contracts, even quotes from other neighborhoods where her approved vendors charged triple for basic repairs. And the audio clip, it was embedded in the article. People could hit play and hear her voice say, "We lose the stream." My phone lit up like a Christmas tree for 2 days straight. Karen panicked. She sent out this desperate neighborhood-wide email trying to spin it as a smear campaign by a disgruntled homeowner with a personal vendetta. She claimed the audio was doctored, the documents taken out of context, and that the media had been manipulated. No one bought it. And then she made her biggest mistake. She tried to cancel the special meeting, claiming a security risk due to online harassment. That backfired so fast it was almost sad. One of the other board members, a guy named Mark, broke ranks and sent an open letter to everyone saying he no longer supported Karen's leadership. He admitted he'd been pressured to stay silent and was unaware of the extent of financial misconduct. Now we had dissent inside the board. Karen finally agreed to hold the meeting, but not at the clubhouse. She booked the local library's event room, probably hoping it would be more controlled. She even tried to limit the speaking time to 2 minutes per person. I brought my flash drive. I showed up early. Sarah and Cody came with me. Cody wore his "I Love Gazebos" t-shirt he made as a joke, and I think it broke the tension more than anything. People clapped when we walked in. Actual claps, like I was a minor celebrity in a sitcom about suburban vengeance. The room filled up fast, standing room only. Even some folks from nearby neighborhoods came to listen, including a guy in a suit I later found out was from the AG's office. Karen got up first, tried to open with her usual calm authority voice, thanking everyone for attending, reminding us to remain respectful and adhere to procedure. Then she turned to me. I was already halfway to the podium. I started by thanking everyone for showing up. Then I gave a brief rundown of how we got here, the letter, the fines, the threats, the chainsaw crew. I kept it tight. Then I played the audio. Karen's voice echoed through the speakers. Pin drop silence. Then came Fletcher. He stepped up with his binder, his cane, and a printed copy of an old budget report with handwritten annotations. He read excerpts, showed mismatched figures, referred to the vendor contracts. At one point, he said, "I wanted to believe we were doing something good, but I didn't sign up to help someone skim money off garden benches." It was brutal. Calm, clear, and brutal. More people spoke. Joe, Liz, even the Prius couple. They all told their own stories, not just about me, but about the weird fines, the silence, the retaliation. It snowballed. Karen tried to respond. She stood up, but the room had turned. No one booed, no one yelled, but no one clapped either. Just a cold, collective silence that said, "We see you now." When it was over, we filed out into the parking lot, dazed. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet, but I knew the tide had turned. For good, this time. The next steps weren't mine to take. The Attorney General's office would be stepping in. There'd be investigations, maybe even charges. But one thing was crystal clear: Karen's reign was crumbling. And that gazebo, still standing, untouched. You ever feel the air shift around someone when they realize they've lost? Not in a dramatic yelling match kind of way, but that slow sinking stillness when their power just sort of evaporates. That's what it was like watching Karen walk out of that meeting room. She didn't storm off, no tantrum, just a quiet little nod, like she was pretending she still had some dignity left to cash in. She didn't even look at me, which was fine, honestly. I wasn't looking for a stare down. I had everything I needed: the truth, the people behind me, and my damn gazebo still standing proud in my backyard like a flag planted on enemy soil. Within a week, things escalated, just not for me this time. The local blog story kept spreading. It hit the bigger Austin news outlets next. They didn't even bother changing the title. Gazebo Gate stuck. Apparently that word just had a rhythm to it, and it made for a perfect lead-in every time they showed the now famous photo. Me standing with arms crossed under the gazebo, with Cody and Charlie on either side, like we were some kind of suburban resistance movement. Then came the follow-up. News vans rolled into the neighborhood, actual news vans, like from TV, the kind you only ever see for high school football games or when a squirrel shorts a power line. This time, though, they were here for Karen. They didn't need to chase her down. She gave a statement from her porch, trying to act unbothered. I watched it live on the 6 o'clock news. She was wearing a lavender blouse and that same tight smile she wore the day she told me we're looking into it. Said the whole thing was deeply disappointing and taken out of context, and that she welcomed a thorough and fair investigation. 2 days later, the HOA board held an emergency vote and removed her as president. They didn't even wait for the official investigation. They just cut the rope. The remaining members claimed they were misled, that they hadn't been aware of how deep the conflicts of interest ran. Maybe they weren't lying. Maybe they were just trying to cover their asses. I didn't care either way. Mark, the board member who broke ranks earlier, was appointed interim president. First thing he did, freeze all current fines and violations pending review. Second, issue a formal apology to the homeowners. It came in the mail, same envelope, same letterhead, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a clean, direct statement that the HOA had failed in its duty to serve the community transparently and fairly, and that a full audit of the association's finances and procedures was underway. I stared at it for a long time. It felt surreal, like I'd just gotten a thank you note from the monster under the bed. Then, a couple weeks later, the real bombshell hit. The state AG's office filed formal charges against Karen for fraud, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. The words sounded cartoonishly dramatic when I read them, but I'll be damned if they didn't fit. Apparently, that little recording Cody got kicked open a whole investigation into other HOAs where Karen had worked as a consultant, places with the same shady vendor lists and mysteriously inflated project budgets. The part that got me most, they mentioned my neighborhood by name in the press release. Not me, not directly, but they credited a homeowner's recording and supporting documentation as the catalyst for the case. I walked out back after reading it, stood under the gazebo, and just breathed. That structure, which had once felt like a liability, now felt like a monument. It was still the same stained cedar and sun-faded cushion covers, but it meant something else now. Not just a cool, shady spot to drink iced tea, not just a place to unwind with Charlie while Cody practiced skateboard tricks in the driveway. It was proof. Proof that when you're right, and I mean really unshakably right, and you keep going even when every voice tells you to back down, you can actually win. Not because someone handed you the victory, not because the bad guys got sloppy, but because the truth was louder than their lies and you didn't shut up. The neighborhood changed too, not overnight. But something cracked open. People talked more, waved longer. A couple families who'd been silent during the drama stopped by with baked goods or, hey, just wanted to say thanks. One guy, Chuck, who I'd only ever seen from across the street mowing in those white New Balance dad shoes, brought over a six-pack and just said, "You did what I didn't have the guts to." Even the HOA meetings got normal, like productive. There were actual discussions, votes, compromises. I even went to one where they debated whether to allow holiday inflatables over 4 feet tall, and nobody yelled. It was weirdly wholesome. Cody still brings up that day he made the recording, usually when he wants extra screen time. Hey, remember when I saved your gazebo and helped dismantle a corrupt HOA system? Maybe I've earned another hour of Minecraft. I usually cave. Sarah jokes that I should run for the board next. I always laugh and tell her I'd rather wrestle raccoons, but who knows? For now, I just enjoy the quiet, the peace, and yeah, the shade. The funny thing is, the gazebo doesn't even look that fancy. People expect it to be this big, flashy centerpiece after everything that happened, some grand monument to rebellion or whatever, but it's not. It's just wood and screws and a couple hanging lanterns that flicker when the wind picks up. Still, it feels like something more now. I sit out there most evenings, drink in hand, Charlie snoring at my feet like a hairy little sentinel, and I just let the quiet settle in. Cody usually wanders out at some point, flops into one of the lawn chairs, and starts talking about school or music or whatever game he's into that week. Sarah joins us when she's done grading papers, curls up with her book, and sometimes we don't even talk, just sit there, letting the cicadas hum and the world do its thing. Every once in a while, I catch myself thinking back on all of it, the letters, the threats, the chainsaws, and I almost laugh. Almost. I mean, if someone had told me that a backyard gazebo would spark a neighborhood uprising and get someone indicted, I would have asked what they were smoking. But here we are. It changed me more than I expected. Not in some hero of the people way. I'm still just a guy who wanted a shady spot to eat ribs and avoid sunburn. But I learned something about myself. About all of us, really. People give up too fast. We tell ourselves the system's too big, too rigged, too far gone. And sometimes it is. But sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "Nah, that's not okay," and refusing to sit down when they're told to. I don't have illusions about how perfect things are now. The HOA still exists. There's still drama. Someone tried to ban solar lights last month because they were too whimsical, whatever that means. But now people speak up. They ask questions. They care. That's new. That matters. Fletcher still walks his dog past our place. He always pauses, gives me a little nod like we're part of some secret club, the guys who saw behind the curtain and lived to tell the tale. I think that's enough for him. It's enough for me, too. I kept every letter they ever sent me, every fine, every warning, not out of spite. I just wanted the reminder, proof that I wasn't crazy, proof that I pushed back. They're all in a shoebox in the closet now, under a stack of board games and tax folders. Sometimes I think I should burn them, make a little fire pit celebration out of it. But I don't. I like knowing they're there, collecting dust, losing their power. The best part? The gazebo never moved, never changed. It just stood there through all of it, through the silence, the fights, the meetings, the exposure, and in the end, it stayed exactly where I built it. That feels good. That feels right. Anyway, if you ever come over, that's where you'll find me. Under the roof they tried to tear down, feet up, drink in hand, dog snoring, kid rambling, wife reading, sun setting through the slats. And if you ask nicely, I might even tell you the whole story again.